encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network.
Hello, and welcome to Wifey Wednesdays, a podcast for women who are seeking to be the best wives they can be. I'm your host, Emily Hatfield, and this is the show where the plan is always to do things God's way, especially our marriages. Thank you so much for joining me for season 18 of this podcast. It is really hard to believe that I have been doing a podcast for that long, 9 years. A lot has happened in that time. Hopefully, prayerfully, I'm a better wife than I was 9 years ago, but I'm also now a mom who has moved to 3 different places and has had lots of different seasons of my life. I'm a wife who is a mom who has now lost her mom, and that has put me in a very different season of life. So some of you have walked that road too. And some of you have just walked that road with me and seen the effects of that. So thank you for bearing with me. Last season, I did 4 episodes of this podcast. 4. And in my mind, that's just super embarrassing. What's even harder to admit is that I just wasn't doing okay. In order to survive, something had to give. The pressures and time constraints of this podcast had to go while I tried to teach first grade to my first child, all the while not having my elementary school teacher mom to ask questions to as I was homeschooling for the first time. So, as I start this season of the podcast, let me just say a few things right off the bat. 1, I'm really sorry that I randomly dropped off the podcast last season. I love this podcast very, very much, mostly because of all of you who constantly encourage me and lift me up and help me in my walk with Jesus. I missed our interactions. I missed the feeling of friendship that I get by doing this podcast. So in pulling back, I feel like I pulled back on relationships with you all that I have built in the last 9 years. And so for that, I want to say sorry. I also want to say thank you. Thank you for being understanding and helpful and encouraging, even while things were silent. So many of you reached out and prayed for me, knowing so much of what was happening in my headspace. I truly appreciate it so very much. You are the best listeners in the world, and I am forever grateful for each and every one of you. All right, let me also say, we are starting this new thing, and by new, I mean it's old. When we started the Light Network, we started doing video and audio podcasts, and that quickly became too much for me. And as I've just gone through saying everything's too much, here I am adding video back to the podcast. So if you are someone who likes to watch the podcasts, they are going to be streamed on YouTube, and you can go and you can enjoy or laugh at me doing a video recording of my podcast. You're not missing anything. If you don't watch the video, it's still the same audio. I'm still doing it. You just get a glimpse into my homeschool room, which is a sorted mess. So if you watch the video, you are going to get glimpses of whatever random things we are doing. Presently, there is a skeleton labeled with random Post-it notes. So you never know what you're going to get into with the videos. I say that as a warning. It's back. I hope you enjoy it. That's another way that you can listen, you can share, you can join me on this journey. But just know, if you don't, if you just keep listening the way you always have, probably a better choice, because this is a lot. So let me say something else before we get into today's episode. We are having our first ever Light Network conference. And I'm very excited. This is going to be happening next month in September. It will be in Henderson, Tennessee at the Henderson Church of Christ. It is free, absolutely free to attend. There will be all kinds of sessions from almost all of your favorite TLN hosts. I am going to be doing a couple of Wifey Wednesdays things. I'd love for you to be able to be a part of this. I think that it's going to be a time where you're going to be able to get to know some of the hosts of the podcast that you listen to and get to have interactions and ask questions and give feedback and just encourage us, and hopefully we'll encourage you. So I really would love if you are in any way able to come to the TLN conference. You can visit thelightnetwork.tv and the conference. All of the schedule and everything else is up there, and you can get more information about that. So thelightnetwork.tv/conference. We would love it if you would register so that we can know how many to expect. But anyway, it's free, and we would love to see you. One final thing, and it doesn't matter if you're listening to audio, but if you are watching the video, then you know I got some serious glasses glare, and I'm going to be sorry about that. I'm going to try to get it fixed, but let's be real. I don't know if I can. It's just the plight of a glasses wearer. So there we are. Okay. Now for the main reason you're here, the actual podcast. Let's dive into this season of Wifey Wednesdays. As I was pondering over the summer what we should talk about this season, I couldn't help but keep coming back to the different seasons of wifeydom. So this season, we are going to be talking about all things under the banner of being a wife. I've got all kinds of ideas about lots of things that we go through, things that we try to do. So I hope that you'll be joining me for the remainder of the season. It's just going to be a whole lot of stuff that we cover for these episodes. I've got quite a few episodes already recorded. So you will hopefully be hearing from me more than the 4 times you did last season. So I'm sorry about that again. I'm going to try to stop saying sorry about it. It is what it is. We're moving on. It's season 18. Let's do this. For the first episode of season 18, where better to begin than where I am right now? Being a wife in grief. You've probably been there. At some point in your life, you have grieved something. And it's one thing to grieve something privately, but when you're married, you share the grief. Mostly because grief changes you. It impacts your brain and your heart and maybe even your day-to-day life. And even if you're like me, where the loss you're experiencing is on your side of the family, after all, it was my mom, it still affects my husband because grief touches every part of your life, maybe especially your marriage. When my mom died, I remember how alone I felt, and then how alone I wanted to be. I didn't want to share the grief. It was my pain wrapped all around my life experiences, and I just wanted to be able to control something because death is something you absolutely cannot control. Also, let me just pause by saying for a moment that Satan is the absolute worst. Okay, moving on. I needed to be in control of something, so my grief felt like the thing that I needed to control, but it spilled out everywhere. It spilled out into the ability to even function, to take care of my kids, to be close to my husband. My grief took every ounce of my energy, and I didn't have more left for anyone or anything. You can see how that's problematic in a marriage. If there's anything that I've learned from this grief experience, it's this. You can't carry it alone. You weren't made to. Now, I'm not here suggesting that you give all your grief and all the deep heart feelings to your husband because he may not be in a place to handle them. You may be sharing grief over the loss of a child, a miscarriage, loss of a friend, loss of a job, or a deep friendship. You may be sharing equally in the grief. So he may not be able to handle it, but guess what? He's not supposed to be the one holding you together anyway. When life shatters around you and your heart feels broken into a million pieces, I feel like we do more harm than good when we expect our husband to make it better and to put us back together. Because, sister, that's a God job. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. Psalm 34:18 tells us, "The Lord is my shepherd, who is with me in the valley of the shadow of death." Psalm 23 tells us. Trust in the Lord. Commit your way to the Lord. Psalm 37 tells us. Trust in the Lord at all times. Psalm 62 tells us. I was completely knocked off course when this grief came into my life. And if you know grief, then you know the feeling. But the greatest blessing that has come from it is that this grief threw me into a pit that forced me to look up. A pit that made me gaze into my God's direction. And it was only then that I could begin to be lifted out. Now, let me say, I'm not out of grief. I'm still very much on my grief journey. It seems I'm always in a season of grief. Sometimes new things trigger it. Sometimes anniversaries trigger it. Sometimes it's just a memory or a smell or a song or some tiny thing that blindsides me and knocks me back into the pit. But I am trying to force my brain into adopting the habit of looking up from the pit instead of trying to claw my way out by myself. God loves you so much. He created people that wouldn't die, and he didn't want them to. But Adam and Eve chose death, and they chose it for all of us. Thankfully, Jesus made a way for us to overcome. Still, death is here, and it's ugly and awful and a huge tool in Satan's arsenal. The grief from it leads many down a path that they never recover from. But you and I have a choice. We have a choice just like Adam and Eve did. No, we don't get to choose whether or not to die or whether or not the people we love will die, but we do get to choose where we will go when grief happens. Will we run and hide and try to clothe ourselves in an insufficient way like Adam and Eve did? Or will we run to our Maker? Will we reach out to him, run to him, knowing that only he can handle the pain? Now, notice I didn't say that he will take away the pain, because often that doesn't happen. But he alone makes the pain manageable. Doable. Only the promise of life forever with him makes the day worth living. If you are a wife in grief, let me give you a few pieces of advice that you didn't ask for. In the first place, pray and pray hard. When you don't want to, when you don't know what to say, when you don't feel like doing anything at all, pray. I cannot tell you how many prayers I've uttered that were simply, help me. Take this away. Help me. Sometimes there weren't even words. And then there was just the assurance that the Holy Spirit could hear the groaning of my heart and translate that into words for my Father. Don't stop praying if you're in grief. Give it to God. In the second place, don't shut your husband out. You might want to. You might not know how to include him, but try. Do your best to give him directions on the good days for how to handle the bad days. Try to give him insight into your brain because he absolutely won't know unless you tell him what helps and what doesn't, what makes it worse. Assure him that you want to be close to him, but you are even physically hurting. If being intimate is hard, try simply having some skin-to-skin contact that isn't sexual in nature. Talk to him about it. Be open, but be forthright with all of the information because this affects him too. In the third place, see your doctor. Grief can mess with all kinds of things, mental health and physical health included. Speak to your doctor about trouble sleeping, eating, or anything else. I went for months without sleeping through the night, and it wreaked havoc on my body. Having to have help dealing with a loss can sometimes feel like you're broken or that you're not handling things how God wants you to, but I am thankful for the blessing that God has given us with modern medicines and understandings of brain processes that equips doctors to take good care of us. You aren't a bad Christian if you need medication to help a problem that you have. Heart problem, brain problem, leg problem, whatever it is. Talk to your doctor if you're having difficulties that are affecting your relationships, your sleep, your activity level. Just do it. Fourth and finally, don't shut God's people out. People mean well, even if sometimes, or most of the time, they don't say the right thing or do the right thing. I remember dreading going to worship after my mom died, mostly because 2 other people in my family died within a month after that. And it felt like people couldn't keep up and they just kept asking. And I felt like I was having to break the news over and over to different people about, this person died. Yes, someone else died. Yes, I'm going. It was like I was living in my own death-saturated Groundhog Day. It was awful. 10 out of 10 do not recommend going back to that. But giving in to the temptation to not go to worship, that's going to lead you to the temptation to never return or to skip out on your relationship with God based on how you're feeling. And the truth is, sometimes we won't feel it. Sometimes we won't want to, but don't skip. God is worthy of worship when we are having mountaintop moments and when we are having valley of the shadow of death moments. God is worthy always, and He alone understands my heart and my health, my mental state, and everything else about me. Were there days that I went and I wasn't able to audibly sing one single word? Yes. Were there days that I cried through much of the entire service? Yes. But where else would I want to be to pour out my deepest grief than before the throne of God? I absolutely 100% get the not wanting to get out of bed thing. Don't give in to it. Allow God to equip you with His strength to keep going. One of the things that I've said since walking through all of this grief is that God absolutely gives you more than you can bear by yourself. But He never gives you anything more than He can and will handle with you. So while this grief is heavy, too heavy, it's not too heavy for an omnipotent God. Casting all of your cares on Him because He cares for you. Don't keep any of the cares for yourself. They're too heavy. God cares for you more than you can possibly comprehend. So make sure that you take your heavy heart to Him. He wants to mend it. He wants to hold it in His hand. the very hands that formed it. Trust him through this grief. There are about a million other things that I could say in an episode like this. But we're going to end it this one way. Whatever weight that you feel is crushing you, know that your God is bigger and stronger and capable of carrying the weight for you. Don't hold back from him. If we will walk through grief with God, then we'll be able to handle being in grief as a wife. It won't take the pain away. It won't bring back whatever the loss is that we're experiencing. But he will make a way to be glorified through the pain. That's all we want, right? For God to be glorified in every situation. I know that this is heavy. What a start to season 18. I promise not to cry on all the videos. So that may turn you off from the videos too. And if I can turn anyone off from the videos, that might be fantastic. But I just want you to be encouraged today that whatever you're going through, take it to God. He can handle it. And don't let anybody tell you that God hasn't put on you more than you can handle. He can, and he will do that. But guess what? He's there. And he has not put more on you than he's willing to bear for you. So give it to him. Give it to him and trust him to carry the load. He is a good, good Father. And I am so thankful that he is the one that we serve, that he is the one that we depend on, even above our husbands. He's the one, and he's here for us. If you are a wife experiencing grief, whatever that grief may be, we all grieve losses. Any loss, we grieve the loss. So whatever it is, whatever outcome wasn't what you expected, just know God is with you, and he is willing and so capable of handling whatever it is you've got going on. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I hope you'll join me for the rest of the season as we discuss what it means being a wife in all different situations, who does all different kinds of things. Next week, we're going to lighten it up a little bit, and we're going to talk about being a wife who studies. I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll share this podcast with your friends who are interested in shining like Jesus in their marriages. I hope that you will join me on Instagram. The handle is Love God, Love Your Husband. We're going to be doing a lot more Instagram reels and stories, little snippets of the podcast that you can share with your friends on that platform. So I hope that you will join me in all of these ways. Don't forget about our Facebook page. That's a great way to get the word out. I appreciate you all so much. I'm not saying sorry again about last season. I'm just moving forward. And I'm going to say thanks. And until next time, remember, love God, love your husband.